Luke 23, 52-56 says, "This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid him in a tomb cut in stone, where no one had ever yet been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment." Saturday is a day we so easily forget when remembering the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Good Friday is often a somber but rich remembrance, and of course Easter is a great day of celebrating the resurrection. But Saturday is something we tend to breeze by in our day and age. Not so when this Saturday in Luke 23 actually took place. Jesus was dead. While he and the prophets had promised that he would arise, his disciples and his friends didn't seem to get the message. So on this Saturday, we really see two realities. The first reality is death. Jesus really tasted death. There's a lot of speculation and views about where Jesus went after he took his last breath on the cross. But what they all agree on was he was truly separated from his body. He truly experienced death that day the way that we will experience death. And the second reality is despair. We see the disciples' despair. Imagine again not knowing the story like we know it. They don't know about Sunday, what's coming on that day. And so Jesus dies a horrific death, and the next morning they wake up feeling confused and hopeless and afraid. We know this in part because in Luke 24, when the disciples are walking with the risen Christ, who they don't yet know really is the risen Christ, they're talking about what had happened, and they say, "He was the one who we had hoped would redeem Israel." And then when Jesus appears to the disciples in John 20, we see that they're locked behind doors, afraid of what was happening. So on the day when Jesus lay in the grave, the disciples really were processing a true death and real despair. So what then does that Saturday mean for us? Well, first of all, it tells us that death was for us. Hebrews 2:9 says that Jesus was crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Jesus tasted death for us. His experience of death was true in the way that we will experience it because of our sin. It was not false, it was not fabricated, it was not fleeting. It was a full death lasting until the third day. Thomas Goodwin says, "He was plunged into that sea of God's wrath, which we should have sunk under forever." Jesus didn't skip across the top of the water of death. It wasn't some mere momentary experience. Rather, he was plunged into death, truly experiencing it on our behalf for our sin. And so first we see that death was for us. The second thing we see is that there's death to the waiting. John records in John 19:30 the words of Jesus when he breathed his last, saying, "It is finished." Our redemption was actually accomplished in Jesus' death. The disciples had feared the mission failed, but in reality, Christ in the grave proved the mission was accomplished. This experience of death is so critical to the good news that Paul actually includes it in his articulation of the gospel in 1 Corinthians 15, when he says it's of first importance that Christ died, was buried, and was raised from the dead. This very burial is a critical component of the gospel because it demonstrates finally that the mission was accomplished. In the same way that God rested after his work in creation, Jesus takes his Sabbath rest in the tomb after accomplishing his mission of redemption. So we see then that death is for us. We see that there's death to the waiting for the mission to be accomplished. And finally, we see death to death itself. Romans 6:9 says, "We know that Christ, being raised from the dead, will never die again. Death no longer has dominion over him." So by tasting death as truly man and then conquering it in the resurrection, he provides the same hope that we also will taste death temporarily. Death no longer holds us. It no longer has a sting. J.I. Packer puts it this way. He says, "Christ's death was the death of death for his people." This should be of great comfort to us when we experience death of those around us. Jesus' time in the tomb reminds us that the tomb is not a prison. It's merely a holding place on the way to glory. So we have faith that helps us not fear death. So we should not skip over the death and burial of Jesus. While the death of Christ must have been bad news for the first disciples, it's very much good news for every disciple since then. It is his experience of death that gives us hope for the future and faith for our waiting, since death, while sorrowful, is not permanent. Our Savior tasted death that we may savor life in him.